Many nonprofits often send the same kind of direct mail appeal to their audience time and time again, without ever really knowing if it's working. They just do it because that's how we do it. Well, today let's look at 5 ways you could test your direct mail approach to find out if it's working as it should or if there's a better way you could go about it. And I've also got one wildcard option that you can try if you're thinking, let's get a little crazy and try things outside the box. All right, let's dive in. One quick note on testing before we get started. It can be a slow process, it can be more expensive, and many organizations never isolate a single variable. They try to test too many things at once, and you can't really do that because you won't know which of those variables actually made the difference. So they end up thinking they're learning something, but they're really just guessing. So today we're going to isolate single things that you can change in your direct mail, single things you can test to see if they work for your organization. The other thing to keep in mind is that you want to test at least a minimum of 10% of your audience. Now, depending on your list size, that could end up being only a few people, or it could be thousands of people. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about cost. If you're able, you could bump the test up even higher to get a more accurate sample, but at 10%, you're really going to get a good idea of what's working and what isn't. Okay, so our first thing to test is going to be your outer envelope. Now, a lot of direct mail shows up and it's just a plain white envelope. Maybe it's got a window in it, maybe it doesn't, and it just looks like any other business mail. What you can do is try putting something interesting on your outer envelope. Some examples. Let's say you're an animal charity. You could put a little picture of a dog and some text like, "Thanks to you, my life doesn't have to be rough." Okay, you can come up with something better, but you get the idea. If you're a social services nonprofit, maybe it's just a quote, something like, "I no longer have to worry about the future." Or maybe it's a statistic. 95% of all kids to come through our program successfully graduate from high school. Something like that. You can come up with something better that works for you and your organization. But just really get creative about what you might put on that outer envelope, because what you have on there will catch the recipient's eyes and will tell them, oh, maybe this is something I want to read. Test number 2, if you normally send pretty long letters, try sending a shorter one. Or if you typically send pretty short letters, try sending a longer one. My hunch is that the shorter letters, assuming they're pretty much the same content or vibe overall, and still have a good, strong story and ask to it, will perform better. But this is something you can try. If you've always just sent short letters, you don't know if the longer letters work, and vice versa. So try in your next appeal to create another version of your letter, whether it's shorter or longer. Keep the same overall message, keep it a strong impact story or whatever the hook is that you have for it, and make sure you still have a strong ask and don't make it wishy-washy. Please consider giving. Okay, I'll consider it. I considered it. No thanks. Make it a strong ask, but really try to keep the only thing you're changing the letter length. Now, obviously, if you're expanding a letter, it's going to have a lot more words, and so it's inherently going to be different. That's why you just try to keep it the same overall tone. And same thing if you're cutting a lot back to make it shorter, try to keep the same overall elements that make the longer letter strong, like the hook, the ask, anything else you have in there, like good statistics. Try to keep those all in there, but just condense it down and find out maybe one or the other works better for you. All right, test number 3. If your letters tend to always come from the same person or the same level of your organization, like a CEO or a development director or a board member, try switching it up, testing a piece coming from a different perspective, using a different voice. So let's say your letters almost always come from your CEO. Maybe you have a beneficiary at your organization who has a great story of how donor support really helped change their life. If they're willing and able, maybe they would like to have a letter come from them. You can write this letter. You can run it by them to make sure they approve of it, get their sign off on it, and be good to go. You could also try sending a letter from a donor. Now, donor stories can sometimes be problematic because it looks like, here I'm this rich person coming in to save everyone. But if you really control the letter in a way that just sets it up as them showing that they were so moved by the work being done at your organization that they had to get involved and really want you to as well. It can be a better approach than just saying, I give because I can really make a lot of difference with all of my money. So find the heart, the reason why they're giving, and make that important in the story. So it doesn't always have to come from a leadership level person. I think a lot of donors tend to expect that, especially if that's really all you ever send, and that can be fine. I'm sure they appreciate hearing from your leadership. But try testing 10% of your list with a letter coming from somebody else. This gets a little wonky if you're sending a letter from your CEO and a test with one from, let's say, a beneficiary. They're going to have wildly different stories, so you're changing a lot more than just who's signing it. But I really think that if you focus on trying to keep the overall feel of your message the same, whether it's from a CEO or a beneficiary, it will read similarly so that your test can be pretty accurate. If you send 10% of your letters with this beneficiary story instead of from the CEO, you'll have a pretty good idea of whether or not it resonated with people. So think about how you can incorporate that without changing too much about the message, but have it come from this different voice, this different perspective, and see how that goes. All right, test number 4 is looking at sending just plain letters on Letterhead versus something that looks a little bit more of a flyer. And I'll put some examples up on the screen for you here just so we're all thinking the same thing. But letters can be pretty boring, especially just to look at. You open it up and it's just a wall of text. Nobody likes walls of text anymore, right? So what you can do is you can either try putting in some pictures into your letter, still kind of using the same overall letter template, but just put in some pictures. But what I really recommend and what I enjoy a lot more is creating something totally different. So for 10% of your audience, instead of them receiving just a letter, turn that letter into some sort of flyer. So you've got a headline, you've got some pictures, maybe you've got some stats or infographic kinds of things, something to really make it stand out. When I used to do these a lot in some of my old jobs, I would hear from people that they actually held on to these just because sometimes they look kind of cool. And people like to keep things on their fridge, and for some reason they liked keeping my solicitations on the fridge. Now, that maybe that means they didn't give, I'm not exactly sure, but it nonetheless captures the attention more than a letter will. And if you kind of take the approach that you're not sending a big giant letter, but you keep the letter at a more moderate size, then you can probably fit that same letter onto this flyer and still have these other visual elements that help break it up and make it a little easier to read, a little more interesting, and hopefully capture people's attention a little bit more. So I would encourage you to try this out. Again, it's going to be a little bit more expensive because you've got the graphic design elements, you've got some color if you go a full color route. So if you've got the budget, try creating a piece that's a little bit more like a flyer, a little more visually appealing. Send that to 10% of your audience and see how it goes. All right, test number 5 involves sending an email after you've sent your direct mail. Many of you might already do this, but if you're an organization that hasn't quite figured out if this benefit is worth it or not, great time to test it. So send your direct mail out as you normally would to your full audience, but pick a group of people at random to also send a follow-up email about, 3 to 5 days after they've received their direct mail, prompting them not only to make their gift, but kind of giving that same story that was told in your letter again as well, a shortened version of it, because people don't want to read a whole letter in an email. So, take your letter, if it's from your CEO, if it's from a donor, whatever it is, condense it down into a small email, and add something at the top of the email, maybe in the subject line, just in case you missed this. Because a lot of people will set aside your direct mail knowing it's from you, knowing they want to read it eventually, but it ends up in a pile of other things they want to read eventually as well. And oftentimes, they just don't make it back to it. Good intentions, but we get busy. So prompting them with an email might make it easy for them to make their gift. In fact, a lot of people will make their gift without even reading the email because they're like, oh yeah, I was going to read that. I was going to make my gift. Let me just click on your link that you conveniently placed right here in my inbox and go ahead and make my gift. So try doing that. And emails are cheaper to send than direct mail, so you could expand your test here if you wanted to. You could, instead of doing 10%, try 50% and see how that goes. If you find some success doing that, maybe do it again with a bigger test pool, or just start sending it to everybody. Because again, it's a lot cheaper to send emails out than it is to send direct mail. Something you want to keep in mind when you do this, code your link in your email, or have it go to a separate landing giving page so that you know that gifts that came in through that page are tied to this reminder email. That way you'll be able to track whether or not these things work. And that goes for, actually, I should have said this before, that goes for all of your tests. Make sure if you're sending out 2 versions of a letter that each return slip is coded differently so you know which gift came from which appeal. You want to always make sure you know how to tie back your gifts to which appeal they received so you can find out if these tests actually worked. Okay, and our bonus tip, kind of our wild card, try sending out just a postcard, 2 to 3 sentences max, asking for a gift. You know, the picture side of the card can be a powerful image with a nice headline, or it could be an infographic, a stat kind of a thing, just to get people interested, kind of get them right to the point. And then on the flip side, when you can write your sentences, make it short and sweet. You make this possible. Make your gift today. A little bit, more fleshed out than that, but that same basic point. And just see how that does. So this one will get a bit more expensive, which is why it's more of the wild card, because instead of just changing out some text on a letter or sending an email follow-up, you're actually creating a whole new piece. So this is probably one where you definitely want to keep your test pool lower in size, but again, don't go lower than 10% of your overall list, or else you won't have a good result to track. You won't know if your test was sound. So try doing that if you can afford that, if you have room in the budget, because sending out long letters, it can take a lot of work. You got to get people to approve the message, and then you have rounds of editing, and you have more approvals and more editing, whereas postcards tend to get approved and go through this process a little faster because there's a lot less text. People can agree on the image or the cover a little quicker sometimes than the overall tone of a letter. So just keep that in mind. If you find that these postcards are successful, you could try switching to these in the future. You don't need to spend so much time doing the full direct mail. Again, prices are going to be a factor here, so just explore your options and find out what would work best for you. But this is a test definitely worth doing if you can afford it, because postcards are much more easily seen when they arrive in the mail. They're simple. You can include a link to the giving page or a QR code, again remembering to code them so you know where these gifts came from. And you just might find that you have more success just being short and sweet, right to the point. And you could swap these out seasonally. You could get some pre-approved pictures or quotes or stats or whatever you needed on the outer part of the postcard, and make the process much easier going forward. So it's worth giving it a shot. So my challenge to you is to pick one of these tests and try it in your next appeal. The only way you'll ever know if these work is if you try them. And sometimes they'll work. Sometimes they're not going to work. But don't let that discourage you from testing in the future, because, again, the only way you're going to know if a new approach works is to try it. And the only reason you're doing what you're doing now is because somebody tried that at some point and it worked. So try something new. See how it works. Get buy-in from your team and see if you can't create a more creative strategy to approach your donors. Now, if you need any help designing a test plan, that's exactly the kind of thing I can do for you, and you can reach out to me in the link in the description. I would love to help. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons if you enjoyed this video so that more of these will appear in your feed and that I can get into other people's feeds as well. Thank you so much, and have a great day.